No, I'm not muted. Hi, welcome everybody. It's so great to see you. This is the first donor participation project office hours session that's just with me. So you tell me how you feel it goes. I want to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts as we go along. The first question I have for you, which I posted in the chat is how are you doing with your planning? Is it something that you're lagging? Have you tried it other years and it was a disaster? Um, you know, what are you looking to get out of today? So what we're going to be talking about today is more than actual, like, you should plan for this type of campaign in December, or make sure you don't do this type of campaign, or this works and this doesn't. Is we're going to be talking about how to plan, which is something that I honestly never learned as I was growing up as a fundraiser. I had to learn as I went. And I've been fortunate to be able to talk with some really smart and accomplished project managers and people who are managing, their own direct response companies, and that are really sophisticated in this. And I went to business school. They didn't teach it there. So it's one of those practical things that I feel lots of advancement shops are missing. So I hope that today gives you a framework for how to think about your own planning, and as you'll see, how to teach the rest of your department how planning works. What's the best process and flow, so that you have some peace of mind. You have less of those last minute revisions. Board member or VP doesn't like a comma in your letter, and now everything, halt the presses. So, you're trying to avoid that. And ultimately, hey, I'm very optimistic about this, and it's like a super nerdy topic to talk about, but I'm very optimistic about the impact of this. Ultimately, even retain more people, less burnout, all those types of good things. So before we get started, let me see some of what people are saying. Deb Best, a wonderful member of the Donor Participation Project, she says it's tough as a two-person development shop to plan for the next course while keeping up momentum in our current one. Totally agreed. When we go through this, I hope you understand why building in time is important, but yes, it's hard. I mean, I think there's no way around it. I struggled myself with it. I struggle with it every day. Um, Something that sometimes helps is that people do bring me in to run a session for them, and kind of it helps in two ways. First, it forces you, it's like a forcing function. It forces you to carve out time for this. And two, it lets me say things that, as you'll see, you may have to communicate to manage up or across to other departments, So admittedly, it's hard, Deb. Rachel is saying we're looking for some best practices on strategically segmenting our appeal codes, specifically when outside of an appeal. So while today is going to give you a way to have these conversations with your team, and hopefully reach the best possible solution for your individual shop, Rachel, we're not really going to go into like the very mechanics of each appeal. But I think you'll find lots of value today, even without that. So please do stay tuned and just let me know as we go. Like, Louis, let's talk more about this. Analysis, yes, so evaluation, right, of how we're doing. I think the framework I'm going to share, it will let you do that much more objectively, because I know a lot of what happens is you get to do it, you forgot what you'd planned for, what the original goals were, something comes out, probably very good, because we're all, pretty accomplished professionals, but then you're evaluating against what? Against the original goal, against the 500 revisions in the middle, against what actually came out after a board member had an issue at the last minute. So, that's where it gets very, very hard. Scott Solomon, thank you so much. You're also a wonderful donor participation project member. I feel that one of our biggest challenges is that our operational budget for the next fiscal year often does not get approved until May. We are a July 1 organization. This makes it difficult to design the strategy, to plan for revenue goals, the amount of resources that you're going to need to accomplish those goals. Undoubtedly, although one of the first things I'm going to say is that the best way to improvise is when you have a plan. That's really the best way. So I would humbly suggest, and I know, Scott, that you lead a team and that you're highly experienced in this area, but I would humbly suggest that some type of a plan and some type of conversation, structured conversation in the way that I'm going to share today, will get you there. And other thoughts from small departments. So something that irks me is that we often hear this really big sounding advice from consultants or vendors, now other external non-immediately embedded, not in-house fundraisers, and sometimes it's applicable to a specific group, usually well-resourced organizations. And that's something we talk about a lot in the donor participation project. And I tell our presenters, okay, this is great, think of, is there a model, is there a version of this that can be applied in a two-person shop? And I find that to be really so inspiring, and it stimulates creativity in totally new ways. So Jordan, thanks so much for your comment. Not being overly ambitious. Indeed. And I think we can parse that out a little bit, but I think that sometimes we self-censor ourselves, kind of anticipating the problems that people are going to have down the line. And what the project today, the system that I'm going to share, what it does is it gets all those conversations happening up front, so that hopefully once you've compromised on everything that needed compromising, you can execute. You're in execution mode. And what I've found is that just having that clarity, okay, yes, people need to weigh in, and maybe at nonprofits, a large amount of people need to weigh in. But if you have a process, and when it's signed off, it's signed off, I felt empowered to create, to have those big goals, because I said, okay, look, this is my vision. This is our department's vision, the annual team's vision, and I had an outstanding annual fund team at Muhlenberg College. Let's go through this process and see what comes out. So, yes. So Leanne, I'm sorry. There's lots of chat. There's lots of questions today. I'll get to those in a minute, but we have two more from Janet. Beginning the planning process, reactionary to certain parts of fundraising. Thank you. Jeff Neal, yes, multi-channel, and especially coordination across silos. That is important, and I hope you'll find good stuff in here, because I've been in that channel. And convincing the CEO that we need to make investments. So hopefully this helps with all of that. I'm going to drive straight into the presentation. While I'm presenting, it's just little old Lewis, so I won't be able to attend to the chat as much, but don't let that hold you back from posting comments, and I will get back to them. What does help from a reach perspective, and if you think this is valuable and that other people should see it in the nonprofit sector, is to comment and react with all those buttons. I don't see any of them, but they're very much appreciated, and I will see them after the fact. So thank you so much. And without further ado, we'll start the presentation. Bear with me, since there's a couple of screens that need to be taken care of. But essentially, my name is Lewis, and you could be in a variety of places with regards to planning. So you might be thinking, I want to do this better. We've done planning. I think, I have a feeling there should be a better way. You can be in the I can't plan, look, I'm just executing. And we've heard several of those really valuable comments already, and I've been there. So I know how stressful it is, really. You may have changed environment. So I used to run a small team, and now I'm in a larger team, or vice versa. And I'd like to have a little bit of process and understanding. So this can help you, what we're going to share. The benefits are going to be peace of mind, better coordination among teams. So that was Jeff Neal's comments about silos. I have found this to be helpful in that way, admitting that it's imperfect, organizations are imperfect, we are imperfect, and we can always do better, right? And having said that, this process is not probably the final version of what I'm going to be using in my day-to-day, or necessarily what you need to be doing 100%. But I hope that you'll find elements of it that you can start applying to your practice right away. this, we're going to be kind of, it is a little bit conversational, and I think that's a good thing. But the full version of this is actually when people call me, and I run this as a half-day session for them. So just bear that in mind. We won't be able to explore every single detail, and some of the things I'll just reference and say, usually I share this with the teams, and if you have questions about that, just DM me or ask me later. So before we dive into that, a really quick 500 feet view of Lewis, that's me, and my career. I've been immensely lucky to serve at these organizations in a consultant or staff role. At Muhlenberg College, where I was most recently, we had an outstanding culture, leadership, annual giving team. It really did all come together. So when I say I'm proud of our achievements, which I am, that is never like just a one-person thing. But what we were able to achieve was to get, for the first time in the organization's history, into the top 100 ranking by alumni participation. And if anybody here on the call knows that the trend is on the decline, there are less and less people giving to nonprofits in the US every year for the last 10, 20 years. I hope you'll kind of value that achievement. So some other organizations I've been with, part of that strategy was a focus on monthly donors, and that was our number of sustainer donors, which included monthly, quarterly, annual, automatically recurring donors. And as you see here, we weighed heavily into it. We implemented some good strategies, and a lot of them came out of our work in the donor participation project, which you see right here, which has being an organization, a grassroots fundraiser community that I started in 2020. So in the summer of, first summer of the pandemic. It feels so weird to say that, no? And it has grown from 0 to 1,500 fundraisers who get together every month to brainstorm, to support each other, to innovate in how to improve donor participation in our nonprofit. So I find that group to be immensely valuable, and lots of the ideas that I've developed, some of them came from my experience at Hopkins, Maryville, University of Tennessee, Baltimore Symphony, but many of them also came from here. Some of the areas I've worked in, and the donor participation project, after learning from our peers and kind of reflecting on my own experience and what had gone well and not so well, I kind of turned it all into a model, just to organize it in my head. Not to say that this is the reality or what you need to do, but it's just a way to kind of compartmentalize all the knowledge that we've developed. And there are 3 important pieces that you should consider when you want to grow donor participation, which are your content, leading with that content, creating content that is community oriented, community friendly. So 2, building a community, usually starting with that content. And a community is a donor retention machine. And I know, that kind of language about engines and machines, I don't know if that, gives me away, but it does have really important business benefits. And part of my work also with Alma Base now is on building communities. And then 3, asking for the right things, among them monthly gifts. But before we get started there, or before we go into that, which is a topic for another day, let's start with our planning. So I'm going to review really quickly, and it feels, I told everybody this is the first one I do alone. It feels kind of lonely, really. I love the feedback of our Zoom monthly sessions, or of having a guest on these. Well, really good suggestions already around planning. So if implementation is taking away too many of your resources, try to front load planning. And John here suggests 3 months in advance. Yes, I mean, ideally, of course. That would be great. I mean, the reality is that some of your campaigns, like your December campaign, you should be planning way out in advance. The giving day, if you're doing one, hopefully, 6, 12 months, some places do 18 months. I mean, it's crazy. Your reunion campaigns, Yes, I have lots of advice on building monthly giving programs. Please send me a DM, and I'll catch up with you after the presentation. So, planning. Okay, the first thing you need to determine is who is in the room, who's doing the planning itself. So typically that's going to be the people who are most closely involved with implementing. So if you have a direct response team, if you have an engagement team, your engagement team, and you may have lots of different plans. Although I'm always, an advocate for getting together, your communications team. So the people who are going to be sending this stuff out, clicking on the emails, those people may have kind of a middle manager. And that's a good person to be there. Sometimes I have a podcast with a brilliant fundraiser called Mike Dirksen, who runs a company called Build Good, and he says, well, what if the VP wants to be involved in this? Well, yes, definitely, they can be in the room too, but just have clarity on who's actually doing the planning. So previously that might have been me and the annual giving team. I wish that should include your engagement piece also, and I'll go into that later. Once you have those people, you need to know who is going to approve the plan for next year, and this is a critical role. It's somebody who doesn't necessarily have to be involved in the planning itself, but they are the ones who say, yes, go forth and conquer. This is good. This is these are the right things to do. So a number of things can happen here based on practical experience. Sometimes nobody had thought about this. Like, I've been at organizations where you bring this up and it's like, oh, well, we just kind of plan, and then at some point somebody pulls the gun, and it starts happening. I find that approach to be less helpful because it doesn't give clarity to the teams, and it ends up creating lots of questions and eventually burnout, type things like that. So there can be multiple approvers. So somebody could say, well, the approver has to be the chief development officer and the board chair. Maybe a smaller organization, they want to be involved in that. Well, that's okay, as long as we just know that once those people have approved, we're good to go. And that there's kind of a little bit of a process there. It's not just signing off and then forgetting about it, but that helps. And then what are the next steps after the calendar is okayed? So imagine you get together as a team, and for those who are in June 30, July, I know we have all types of nonprofits here with different ends of the fiscal year. But you're planning, and you have a big picture calendar, which is what I would suggest to start with, kind of the big picture. Depending on the size of your organization, that can be like big picture as in immediately under your VP, which would involve engagement, donor relations, annual giving, all those groups, and then those, all of you together developing a calendar. Or it can be like your mini parts. Ideally you start at the top, and then you have kind of, it flows down to the bottom. So a lot of what happens in practice, one, nobody really approves anything, and then there's just no clarity, and it's kind of a mess. Two, the plans come from the bottom up, and that's kind of a problem when they're not kind of matching the plans in across other departments, and when they're not matching the big picture plans for the year. And sometimes there's no big picture plan for the year, so some more entrepreneurial or people with initiatives start doing their own plans because you need something to work on. But then it clashes mid-year with what somebody else thought of was going to happen, but that wasn't really clear. Give me some feedback if that resonates with you, or if you've been in those situations. So what happens after the calendar is okay? You have a calendar. The calendar is essentially a bunch of projects. Each project turns into a project brief. And I'm going to explain what a project brief is. but it's essentially a document. It's like the constitution of that project. It says what the project is for, what the who the intended audience is. It describes the project, and it has somebody who's assigned to manage that project. That gets signed off too. And when you're after that, it gets essentially broken into a chunk of to-do items. So a project is due end of year fundraising campaign. I mean, that's very general, too general, right? Email campaign, end of year email campaign, or top donor renewal campaign at the end of the fiscal year. And let's explore that example a little bit more later. But once you have that is broken down into to-dos, right? So first, this needs to be printed. This needs to be checked with this person. This copy needs to be written. The development officers need to be assigned prospects. And you can manage that through a kind of very sophisticated project management system. There are tools out there like Asana. We built our own in Airtable recently. People use Monday. So there's several, but you also don't need them. It's basically a very complicated, a to-do in Excel. It's, item, date, assigned person. So is all of this making sense? Please feel free to ask questions as we go. And if I don't get anything, I'm going to move on to the next one. Okay. So building the calendar. That's the first step. What I recommend with the teams I work with is that you take a zero-based approach. So a lot of the planning that usually happens is, okay, let's just look at what we did last year. And I find that is detrimental to innovation. Somebody mentioned evaluation and kind of analyzing things. So if at all possible, and you'll see in the next step that I do acknowledge the fact that there are some things that just need to happen. But if, at all possible, just start with a blank slate. Like if you were building your calendar from the ground up, what would you put in it? What is your ideal situation? And like somebody else, implied, don't let the anticipation of what's going to be a problem or what you think is going to be a problem, which may be true or imaginary, hold you back from putting things. And everybody, I'm sure, has been through some type of planning session that involved very large pieces of paper and Post-it notes, right? Well, this isn't any different. So you might have categories. Every team, depending on who you have in the room, might have categories for different types of campaigns or communications or projects. And you'll try to, put them according to some type of criteria. And eventually you put them into each month. So you have all your months and you start filling that up. Okay, so once you have that, I wouldn't worry too much about making this perfect, because you're going to have there's going to be opportunities for lots of people to weigh in on this. So just kind of think of the ideal scenario. This is what our team thinks is best. We acknowledge that other people may have different opinions and constraints, and that this is not going to be, we're not going to be totally upset and crying if this is not the final result. But this is our absolute best shot at this. And so these, some of the elements that you can work into a calendar. I suggest these categories. So think of your must-haves. So these are things that you're going to do every year. So I know many of you who are commenting will have galas. So that's a must-have that needs to happen. The date may or may not have been decided on, but you may know the month. So you can put it on there. You have a December campaign, which you probably need to do, and if you shouldn't, you should very strongly consider doing. And the fiscal year campaign, just things like that. If you're in a higher ed setting, you have a homecoming, you have maybe initiatives that you've done every year. So, I think that's also where you can have a good conversation about, do we really need to do this again? Did it serve our goals? Do we want to, start thinking about changing it, change the date? We had a giving day on our own day, this time last year. How is this year different? So this is the moment to have those conversations, and not like when we're in execution mode 3 months out. So this is a lot of what this is trying to achieve. You have types of communications that are ongoing. So for instance, if you do gift anniversary letters, so these are letters that you send out on the same month that somebody gave in the previous year or several years ago. These are very effective. So for those who are looking for tips, this is a winner. You may have thank you emails, and I put an aspirational date of 48 hours just because that's kind of a pet peeve. You may have all types of comms, and then you have let me go back to that. The ongoing communications happen on the donor's schedule, not on yours. So gift anniversaries depend on when the donor last gave. If you do birthday messages or any type of special date for people, and thank you email. So that's kind of, those depend on things that the donor did. They're responsive to the donor's schedule. And then your engagement program, which increasingly, I see and very strongly suggest that you integrate with your solicitation program. It just doesn't make any sense to keep them separate. So are you doing town hall type meetings? Are you doing surveys? Are you doing another piece I recommend is an update from a staff, development director in small organizations, some type of leadership staff member that just sends out a biweekly update to loyal donors, event invites, volunteer group activity that also has lots of, moving parts. So, and this is where it helps to have that global picture. At Amazon, they infamously have an empty seat at every meeting for their customer. I think that if we had one for our donor, that would be really illuminating. Like, sometimes we should kind of listen to them when they say, I get things all the time, or I only get solicitations, or you're sending me too much or too little. I think it's because when we do this planning, we're in separate groups with separate goals, and we don't have that empty seat for the donor there in the room. So bringing in lessons learned from analytics last year. And it's so great to see you here, Gerhard. I would say that it's as much an art as a science. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I did this. I did this at the Baltimore Symphony. We had an event one year. It was the first year we were doing that event, which was a stewardship event. It went okay. It wasn't huge. Okay, so then what does that mean? Do you scrap it? Do you keep it going? Based on just the numbers of one year, you might say, well, probably we can do other things. Then you also need to kind of know that events take a while to gather steam, especially if they're annual events. And that's a big part of like community building thing. You need to repeat things, and that's how people create that behavior, that habit. So like in that case, we decided to keep it. So that's where I strongly recommend that you have data on attendance, all the amount raised. If you're in a more marketing role, engagement type metrics. Ideally, if you can measure conversations started, so go toward the end of the desired output, desired outcome that you can measure, the better. But once you have that, also kind of weigh that with maybe other factors that are not in the numbers. Is it a good trust building initiative? Another example for you is when you do town halls with your president or with your CEO. Fantastic trust building tactic that works right now. It's kind of been made possible by COVID because everybody has Zoom now on their computers, or most people, many of our constituents have Zoom now. And but then you do it, and a handful of people show up. And so what do? Do you stop it, or do you keep it going? And, and again, I'm going to share kind of my perspective on that is a little bit of the same thing. These things gain by consistency. And in fact, being consistent and reliable is one of the things that builds trust in nonprofits. The opposite, being inconsistent and unreliable, destroys trust. Exactly, Scott. So that 3-year rule was, was also what I operate under. So consistency is important. Number 2, lots of people are lurkers, and that's okay. So sometimes when we have to kind of defend our initiatives, up and abroad, and people say, well, only 12 people showed up, and this is very, very valuable. You need to try to get that point across, that it's important to be reliable and consistent. Try to find stats that reflect interest, even from people who didn't attend. So downloads after the fact, that's huge. And then if you have stories, which I've worked with organizations and talked with fundraisers who like that this just happens. I mean, it's almost a rule of human nature. Eventually, somebody's going to show up who said, oh, I'm sorry I couldn't join any of those town halls that you did, but I really appreciated the invite and I catched up with them later. How do I get your organization in my will for $1 million? So there's this, try to weigh both that kind of short-term ROI facts, but weigh them, ponder them with the long-term, maybe not measurable, but still very important and impactful factors. Okay, so sorry for that digression, but you've built the calendar, you've evaluated, you've started with a blank slate, you've used as many colored Post-it notes as you wanted, and maybe even different color pens on each Post-it notes, and just think of all the combinations you could have. It's just delightful. You're planned, together, hopefully in as broad a team as possible. So if it's maybe 2 teams, I think that's better than 1 team. And the more coordination you can get at this stage, the better, because it's easy to coordinate now because everything is posted on a wall. It's not a plan that we've poured our blood and tears into. So you have the plan. Maybe you take photos or you put it into a written document. How do you get this approved? Okay, so I'm going to suggest that before you take it to the VP or to the board chair or to whoever you agreed upon at the outset needed to approve this, you have a great opportunity for engagement. So run it by your volunteers, and that could be an advisory board, a board of trustees. That just depends. That's very situational, right? Depending on what group is doing the planning in the organization and how big the organization is. But and at the very least, look up your loyal donors, people who have given to you 3 to 5 years in a row, and try to identify a handful of them and call them in to give you feedback. So why this? We're often criticized, and if you haven't been criticized for this, you're probably not talking to enough of your constituents. We're often criticized for doing things without external input. This is the moment to get that input. Not when you've already invested a lot into your plan and suddenly you can't really change anything. So you're asking for input, but it's not really authentic. Or you've negotiated so much across so many departments that really, again, your hands are kind of tied. So this is the moment to run it by volunteers. It's not a bad thing if you have other people who are skeptical about the types of suggestions that you make, even higher up. This is also an opportunity to manage up. Invite that person into this feedback meeting and let them hear from the constituents the type of feedback that people give. So if people start saying, well, all we do is get solicitations from you, well, then you share the calendar with you and you say, you kind of, and again, this isn't like a one, we don't need to bow to these types of comments. You can have a real conversation, and hopefully this gives you a setting to do that. you say, well, look, these are our goals, and we have joint goals with you as somebody who cares about this organization and about the mission that we're accomplishing. But we have lots of different goals that we need to balance. This is our best stab at it. How would you improve it? More times than not, they will give you good suggestions. I mean, really. And they will understand your constraints and work with you to meet them. So, kind of let's take this opportunity that we have right in the middle, in the messy middle here, to come up with better solutions that involve everybody. So that's kind of my pep talk. So finally, you have that plan. It's been discussed. It's the best possible effort from your team, from a smaller group of outside constituents, stakeholders, you might call them. And then you take it to your executive for sign off. And here, exactly. Thanks, Ron. And here there are some rules of engagement for the types and the feedback and the forms of feedback that are okay to give and not. So this is also where it helps to bring somebody from the outside who can say, look, this isn't something that the staff is making up. This is really kind of high operating, way of doing this, and it's really helpful for everybody in the long term. So kind of having somebody from the outside say it helps it. And I'm going to go into those rules of engagement right now. These are the same rules of engagement for providing feedback to the next step, to the project briefs. Okay, so just let me stop there for a moment and see if anybody has questions on that idea of running your plans, even your fundraising plans, with volunteers. I've literally spoken with shops and they said, but I mean, do you actually want their advice? Wholeheartedly, yes. And the moment to do that is right here, is not later, and it's not after you've done it and then you hear their negative feedback. And then also when you get the feedback, you need to reflect on, kind of show it back to them as a mirror. This is the feedback that you gave us, and this is how we're acting on this. So if we don't have any additional comments or questions, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so I fully expect this to be the most fun part of today's presentation for you, which is how do you teach people what the rules of engagement are? So each project needs to have a decision maker / owner. Okay, so when you're approving the calendar, each of those little post-it notes is going to turn into something that that somebody owns inside the organization. That's not going to be the same person as the executive. This is the person who's going to take the description of that project, which we're going to go into in a sec, and is going to use that as the guide to make it happen inside. So it's kind of, like they're going to be able to tell people, look, this is the law, this is what was approved. And, based on this, these are the next steps. So that's what it means when it says the brief rules. And then any additional suggestions that happen after approval. So there's a time for discussion, and the executive, can definitely, discuss and provide input and change things as much as they like. There's a time for discussion, and after approval, everybody needs to understand that other ideas, while valuable and highly appreciated, are going to go into an ideas document or into the post-project debrief. So, this was another great tip that I learned from Mike Dirksen, which is, don't tell people, no, you can't, you can't have any input now, it's too late. Say, yes, thank you. I'm going to put it right here on a whiteboard that I have in my office. And we're going to keep that for the next time we do this project, or for when we evaluate the results of the project. So thank you so much. Also, types of feedback that are not acceptable, are not helpful, or not don't help the project move forward, or I don't like this, I don't think this will work. So things based on opinion or on feel, essentially on feelings. things that do work, feedback that is acceptable is based on the project, on the goals of this project, as you described. I think we should change this to this because of this reason, or based on my experience doing this. So it doesn't have to be scientific. You may just have gone through that same idea a couple of times in your tenure and you have feedback that's valuable. But just saying, I don't like this style is typically, not helpful, and we need to train people away from it. Does this make sense? So how hard do you think it will be to get people into this mindset at your organization? And I tell you, it's possible. Do you anticipate any feedback? And I'm going to start being the devil's advocate here and give you possible feedback that you may get from up top. But what do you think, if you did this at your own shop, what would people say? I'd love to hear that. One possible comment that somebody's going to tell you is, well, there needs to be quality assurance. And, I, as the director, executive director, VP, need everything to go through me. And, and they're kind of controlling for quality, right? Other comments that you might hear. Well, if you think of anything, just put it in the chat. And the answer to the quality assurance one is trying to get people to think about systems to fix that problem so that they don't have to be in it all the time. Admittedly, this, solid planning and good kind of like hygiene, it's like brushing your teeth, but it has to come from the top, right? So so it's always harder to manage this up. But the more you can do that, and maybe even show that you have good processes. Look, everybody installed Grammarly. It's, a new rule that we have in our department. And the more it can set people at ease so that they don't feel this need, the better. But then even if they do need to feel like they need to look at everything, giving a little bit of training, education on the types of feedback that help or don't help, can also help things move forward. Sometimes people just are very busy and, they just say, I don't like this. And then the team doesn't really understand what that means. They take it the wrong way when it was kind of shorthand for, the second version of, good type of comments. Okay, so you have a calendar plan. It was approved. Yay. Each of those little Post-it notes is going to turn into a project brief. Okay. And what is a project brief? It's a structured description of a project. So what structured means is that instead of just a long narrative, it has specific areas for important pieces of information, and I put a kind of snapshot of a corner of the project brief that I use and that I share with teams. It's longer than that. And, it has things like who is the project intended for. It has things that are particular to your organization, who's involved, what department, is this, what's the purpose? Is it, is it a fundraising event, fundraising campaign, an outreach project that the, major gift officers are going to be doing, etc. And then it also has kind of a little more of a description of the project, the date, the number of people that it's going to reach. And that's, again, is part of a conversation. You agree on what that's going to look like, and it gets approved. After that, there are 1 or 2 people in the team that are the project owners. They are the ones in charge of making this happen. And they use this document as their guide. So they're going to go, it's basically going to empower them to do whatever needs to be done to move it forward. If they have issues, they can go, back up to the executive and try to sort those issues out. But, they have the capacity to make decisions. Again, really empowering. It also gave me as a manager peace of mind, because I knew that everybody was aligned. I knew that we had a very clear description of what I expected to happen. And what came out of it was typically an improvement over my expectations rather than the opposite. If there were issues, I didn't try to go into micromanagement mode. I tried to identify the root cause of those issues. Again, spelling, grammarly, not understanding some of the terminology. I either train you or send you to a training, things like that. Other issues, with the data pull, misunderstandings, and lots of too much back and forth around the data pull. Well, then we add a section to the project brief with a checklist of actually, every element that goes into a data pull. Yeah, Mary Lee, of course. It's going to be at this same link afterwards. So, and if you have any questions, just send me a DM. Really quick recap for anybody who joined. We're going over the process for planning a fiscal year. This may be the nerdiest presentation that you've gone to on LinkedIn. I know it's not like very high in the sky. It's not crypto, philanthropy, super, super attractive stuff. But I found this to be a life changer, and it really created more peace of mind and more alignment among the teams. And I've gone through the different steps that I've used to get projects to design fundraising calendars, to get them approved, and then we're going into execution now, which is, so after you have your individual projects approved, each one of them turns into a brief that gets approved too. It gets signed off by an executive, and then it has one or two project owners, managers, whatever you want to call them, who are in charge of making it happen. Another item that we added to the description, so I was just telling about like the data pull. That was one thing that we hadn't thought of, but our analyst came in, tremendously accomplished person, and said, this is just, it's creating too much back and forth. I don't have enough information from the project brief to know what needs to be done. So we added a section on data pulled based on our database, and it had checklists, types of constituents, exclusions, common kind of complex combination of factors. We want to exclude the last class that graduated, things like that. We want to exclude parents that have a student that's on leave of absence, and that will be very particular to you, and you're in the higher arts, if you're in healthcare, if you're in social services, but you get the idea. So finally, I mean, I'm feeling just good about this, just talking about it. Finally, the project gets turned into a to-do list. Essentially, it's nothing more, nothing less. PM stands for project management. It can be a project management system. I mentioned a few: Asana, Monday. We designed our own in Airtable. You can have somebody that's a separate person that's the project manager. If there's a role like that on your team, at a certain level of complexity, and things are getting more complex in fundraising, increasingly even in major gifts fundraising. So, something to think about, highly recommended. And that is a to-do list that has dates when things need to happen and people who are assigned to do them. And maybe the status, to do, doing, done, something like that. And you're off to the races. If you're the executive, hopefully you feel like that's been discussed, approved, it's involved external stakeholders, there's alignment around it, and it can just happen. So, that's the end of the presentation today. If you liked it, I hope you'll consider joining our fundraiser community, donor participation project. It's the best thing that has happened to me professionally in the last 2 years. And I highly recommend it. 1,500 plus fundraisers. We get together every month. And if you have any questions, if you'd like to discuss bringing me on to your team to talking about this, I'd greatly appreciate it. If you, I'm going to stop the share right now and just open the floor up for any questions. Thank you, Alexa, another wonderful DPP member from LA. This presentation is going to live here. So you can always access it at this link. And please, if you think others will be interested, or if you want to share it internally, like look what I discovered on LinkedIn, this crazy guy talking about how to plan. Just share this link with them. So yes, other project management tools. Somebody just asked, Asana, Monday. I did mention Airtable. It requires setup. So like just setup free tool. Those two. There are several others out there for you, different flavors. Monday, it has more of an opinion on how you should be doing the planning. Some of them are more focused to content management. And if you're like, you know, I consider our fundraising projects that involve real humans and real relationships as also campaigns that need to be included in this. So this isn't something that just your annual giving or marketing or direct response team do that's totally separated from your events. So, you know, I invite you to think about that. Is it a tool that will let me integrate all of it? Thank you so much for all the comments. I'm always here to answer questions. And if you have any thoughts or would like more feedback, more resources, etc., or ideas, please do send a note. And I hope to see you at the next donor participation project session. Have a great day. Thank you.